12 seconds before the disaster. In October 2011, teenagers Essa Ricker, Kelsey Webster, and Kelsey's younger sister Savannah posed for a selfie on Utah's Spanish Fork Canyon train tracks, unaware of the tragic events about to unfold just a few moments later. Excited and enjoying the moment, Savannah shared a Facebook post captioned, "Standing right by a train. This is awesome." Their smiles and laughter in the selfie showed their carefree moment, even as the westbound train they waved at passed. However, they did not notice an eastbound train approaching rapidly from behind them. Union Pacific train conductor John Anderson and engineer Michael Anderson spotted the trio from the locomotive. Despite blasting the horn repeatedly, the girls remained oblivious, lost in their moment. Trains traveling at speeds of 55 miles per hour require more than a mile to come to a complete stop, and the eastbound train was already too close, moving at 39 miles per hour. John and Michael could only watch in horror as the inevitable unfolded. The train struck the girls just seconds later. After the train stopped a quarter-mile down the track, John rushed back to the scene. He found two of the girls lifeless. Savannah, just 13 years old, was injured but alive. John comforted her, holding her hand until paramedics arrived, hoping against hope she might survive. Unfortunately, Savannah succumbed to her injuries 3 days later in the hospital. Her injuries included broken bones, internal bleeding, and a severe brain injury. For the families of Essa, Kelsey, and Savannah, the tragedy was obviously a devastating blow. The loss of 3 bright, smiling young lives left their loved ones reeling. Equally impacted were the train crew members who had witnessed the tragic incident. Both John and Michael carried the weight of the accident in different ways. John found solace in talking to coworkers and slowly processing his grief. Michael, on the other hand, struggled silently. He dealt with haunting memories and nightmares. Years later, he became a peer support volunteer to assist others facing similar trauma. In response to this whole tragedy, Union Pacific launched a rail safety campaign in 2016, using animated videos to highlight the risks of taking selfies or engaging in other unsafe behaviors around tracks. One ad depicted a teenage boy narrowly avoiding a collision while racing to beat a train. Another showed a woman stopping just in time to avoid driving around lowered crossing gates. Jana Webster, the mother of Kelsey and Savannah, joined the safety initiative, urging others to heed its message. "The accident that took my daughter's lives was preventable," she said. "No one should have to go through this." Her heartfelt plea aims to prevent similar tragedies by encouraging caution near train tracks. An old violin being sold at auction. At $1.5 million, it's one of the most valuable violins in the world. Not because of who made it, but because of who played it. The initials WH stand for Wallace Hartley, the lead violinist on the Titanic. This is the instrument he played the night she sank, before Hartley himself died. This violin was found floating in the debris field. Jolee Callan, a young woman with a bright future, found herself in a toxic and manipulative relationship with Lauren. Lauren exhibited controlling behavior, isolating Jolee from her friends and manipulating her emotionally. When Jolee wanted to socialize, Lauren would often use guilt or threats of self-harm to keep her close. This controlling behavior became a hallmark of their relationship, creating an environment where Jolee felt trapped. As Jolee approached adulthood, she decided to end the relationship. On her 18th birthday, she told Lauren that their romantic relationship needed to end because she was leaving for college. However, she assured him they could remain friends. Lauren refused to accept this, using his usual tactics of guilt and emotional manipulation to persuade her to reconcile. This time, however, Jolee stood firm and moved forward with her life. Months later, Jolee began dating someone new. Despite her efforts to distance herself, Lauren continued to insert himself into her life, attempting to regain control. On August 13, 2019, Jolee agreed to go hiking with Lauren, a decision that would tragically seal her fate. Lauren meticulously documented the hike on social media, posting several photos of Jolee, including one haunting image of her standing on the edge of a cliff, taking in the scenic view. Unbeknownst to her, this was to be her final photograph. Moments after the photo was taken, Lauren carried out his premeditated plan. He shot her twice in the head and pushed her body off the cliff. When police arrived, they found Lauren waiting by the roadside, his hands covered in blood. He hysterically confessed to the crime, initially claiming that they had made a suicide pact. According to him, Jolee had asked him to shoot her when she couldn't go through with jumping off the cliff herself. However, evidence soon revealed the truth. This was a calculated act of murder. Jolee's family was devastated. Her father suffered a stroke upon learning of his daughter's death, overwhelmed by the senseless loss. Friends shared messages Jolee had sent before the hike, warning that if something happened to her, it would be Lauren's doing. Despite these warnings, the justice system initially considered trying Lauren as a juvenile, sparking outrage among Jolee's family and the public. Eventually, public pressure and further investigation led to Lauren being tried as an adult. He pled guilty in 2017, and the court sentenced him to 52 years in prison, with the possibility of parole only after 75% of his sentence is served. This outcome brought some solace to Jolee's grieving family, though the pain of their loss remains. Jo Rogers and her daughters. In June 1989, Jo Rogers and her two daughters, Michelle, 17, and Krista, 14, from Wilshire, Ohio, embarked on a much-anticipated vacation to Florida. Jo, a farmer's wife, had won a trip to Disney World through a promotion, but decided to extend the trip to include Tampa Bay and its beaches. Tragically, their journey ended in one of the most horrific crimes in Florida's history. On June 1st, the Rogers family checked into the Days Inn motel in Tampa. While there, they were approached by a man offering directions to the best places to view the Gulf Coast. What seemed like a friendly encounter turned out to be a deadly deception. The man, later identified as Oba Chandler, used the information he had gathered about the family to lure them into a trap. In their last hours alive, Jo Rogers and her two daughters took a series of snapshots. One showed Michelle inside the motel room, sunburned and staring into the camera, but it was the very last photo that would be the most haunting. Shot from the motel balcony, it caught the sunlight fading over Tampa Bay. On June 4th, Jo, Michelle, and Krista were last seen leaving their motel to meet someone who had offered to take them for a boat ride on the bay. Their disappearance became a mystery until June 8th, when their bodies were discovered floating in Tampa Bay. All three women were bound, gagged, and tied to concrete blocks. Autopsies revealed they had been alive when thrown into the water, left to drown in the Gulf's dark waters. Investigators struggled to identify the victims until a composite sketch of one of the girls was released, leading to a tip from a worker at the motel where the family had stayed. Dental records confirmed their identities, and the case gained national attention. For 3 years, police pursued leads with little success. A break came when Chandler's name surfaced as a suspect. A handyman with a history of sexual assault, Chandler lived near the area where the Rogers family had stayed. Police connected him to the case through a handwritten note he had given Jo Rogers with directions to the Gulf. The handwriting matched Chandler's, and his background of predatory behavior further linked him to the crime. In September 1992, Chandler was arrested after police obtained DNA evidence tying him to the case. Prosecutors presented a compelling case showing that Chandler had offered the Rogers family a sunset boat ride, intending to assault the women. Once out on the water, he overpowered them, committing heinous acts before throwing them overboard, bound and weighed down. In 1994, Chandler was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Despite appeals, he maintained his innocence, offering no explanation for the evidence against him. On November 15, 2011, Oba Chandler was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison, ending a dark chapter in Florida's criminal history. This may just look like a soldier playing the piano, but he was actually captured on his way to Berlin, and he was forced to play the piano and was told he would be killed as soon as he stopped. He played for 22 hours straight before collapsing in tears, being congratulated, and then was shot. A photographer was asked to capture an image of a storm, so he headed to nearby Plum Island and walked out onto the beach. There, he noticed a lone figure standing by the ocean, gazing out at the stormy waters. She was drinking a beer, which isn't visible in the photo, and smoking a cigarette, Just moments after he snapped the picture, a wave struck the embankment beneath her, eroding the sand and causing her to slip and slide into the water. The photographer was at least 50 feet away, using a telephoto lens. From where he stood, he could see she was in the water, possibly stunned or intoxicated. It was hard to tell. For a brief moment, he contemplated whether he should step in to help. He already had the photograph he needed, so he looked around. About 100 feet away, he spotted a lifeguard and decided to keep photographing the unfolding situation. Someone accompanying the lifeguard reacted quickly, rushing to assist her. He approached, ready to grab her hand and pull her to safety. But at the very last moment, he hesitated. Something stopped him just as he was about to act. This is the last picture of Istvan Reiner. They put the uniform on him, took his photo, and they knew what his fate would be. Apparently, he was put to death in gas chamber 2 weeks later. This photo is from the 1988 Gladbeck hostage crisis in Germany. The guy on the left is a robber. The girl on the right is a hostage who was killed while the police was taking action to stop the crisis. On the morning of August 16, 1988, two armed robbers, Hans-Jürgen Rosner and Dieter Degowski, stormed a Deutsche Bank branch in Gladbeck, West Germany. They held bank employees hostage and demanded a getaway car and 300,000 German marks in ransom. The police complied, providing the robbers with a white Audi and the cash. Taking two hostages, they sped away, beginning a 54-hour ordeal that would shock the nation. During the journey, Rosner's girlfriend, Marilyn Monroe, joined them in the car. The next day, August 17th, the robbers escalated the situation by hijacking a bus with 32 passengers in Bremen. Media frenzy ensued as reporters recklessly pursued the crisis, even conducting live interviews with the robbers inside the bus. Rosner openly declared on camera that he didn't care about the outcome, stating he was prepared to die. Despite the ongoing danger, police took no significant action to intervene. Later that day, the robbers released some hostages, but continued to terrorize those remaining. At a gas station, Marilyn Monroe went to use the restroom, but was promptly arrested by police. Enraged, the robbers threatened to execute a hostage unless she was released within 5 minutes. Under pressure, the police complied, freeing Monroe. Tragically, during this standoff, an Italian teenager named Emanuele De Giorgi, who had been shielding his younger sister, was fatally shot by the robbers. His life could potentially have been saved if an ambulance had been stationed nearby. As night fell, the bus crossed into the Netherlands. Dutch police insisted that young hostages be released before offering any concessions. The robbers agreed, releasing several hostages. In exchange, they were provided with a remote-controlled BMW to continue their escape. 2 hostages were taken with them as they drove back into Germany, tailed by hordes of journalists who photographed and filmed the crisis in real time. On the morning of August 18th, German police finally decided to intervene. On a highway near Bad Honnef, they rammed the BMW to bring it to a halt. One hostage, 18-year-old Silke Bischoff, tragically lost her life in the final moments. The robbers claimed she was killed by police gunfire, but authorities denied this, asserting that she was shot by the robbers themselves. The second hostage managed to escape unharmed during the chaos. Hans-Jürgen Rosner received a life sentence for his role in the hostage-taking, murders, and other crimes committed during the incident. Dieter Degowski was also sentenced to life imprisonment, but was later granted parole in 2018 after serving 30 years. This old photo, taken in 1924 during one of the first British expeditions to Mount Everest. Shortly after this was taken, the 2 men in the picture, George Mallory and Sandy Irvine, would make an attempt for the summit. Mallory's body will be found in 1999. We still haven't found Irvine. Brian Wells. Can't say it's a normal photo since it's a man robbing a bank. The story behind it is that this man, Brian Douglas Wells, was a pizza delivery driver who ended up having a collar bomb strapped to his neck after doing a delivery. He was supposed to rob a bank, or else the bomb would explode. This happened in 2003, Erie, Pennsylvania, and during his attempt to rob a bank, he got surrounded by police. Wells frantically pleaded for help, claiming he was forced to participate in the heist under threat of death. The device, he said, would detonate if he failed to complete a series of tasks within a strict time frame. What followed was a chilling sequence of events that ended in tragedy. Brian Wells, 46, had worked as a delivery driver at Mamma Mia's Pizzeria for over 30 years. Though his employers considered him reliable and hard-working, Wells had recently become entangled in a bizarre and dangerous scheme alongside Marjorie Deal Armstrong and Kenneth Barnes. The plot's goal was to rob a bank and use the stolen money to fund an even darker plan, the murder of Deal Armstrong's father, whose estate was worth nearly $2 million. To execute their scheme, they needed $125,000, which led to the convoluted bank robbery. On August 28, 2003, the plan began. Barnes placed an order for 2 pizzas to lure Wells to a remote location. When Wells arrived, he discovered a grim twist. Instead of simply being part of the robbery, he would carry it out alone with a bomb collar locked around his neck. Wells resisted, but a shot fired into the air coerced him into compliance. The group strapped the device to his neck, handed him a shotgun disguised as a walking cane, and gave him a list of 4 tasks to complete, starting with robbing a bank. At around 2:30 p.m., Wells entered a PNC bank, visibly nervous, and handed a note to a teller demanding $250,000. The teller, unable to access that amount, gave him about $8,700 instead. Wells exited the bank, but police quickly apprehended him in a nearby parking lot. Panicked, he tried to explain his situation, showing the bomb around his neck and the list of tasks he had been given. Law enforcement, unsure of how to handle the situation, kept their distance and eventually called the bomb squad, but only after a 30-minute delay. By the time help arrived, it was too late. As Wells sat surrounded by police and news cameras, the device detonated, killing him instantly in full view of the media. The shocking scene horrified the nation and raised immediate questions about the crime's origins. Subsequent investigations revealed the full extent of the plot. In 2008, Barnes was sentenced to 45 years in prison, and in 2010, Deal Armstrong received a life sentence plus 30 years. Just a normal day with a family taking advantage of wildflower season and getting a wholesome photo. Just below the wife, a rattlesnake is in mid-strike towards her forearm. The wife was bitten and survived, but the dog did not. Yarnell Hill Fire. On June 30, 2013, one of the most devastating wildfire tragedies in U.S. history unfolded in Yarnell, Arizona. The Yarnell Hill Fire, initially sparked by lightning on June 28, seemed manageable at first. However, weather changes caused the fire to grow uncontrollably, fueled by dry brush and fierce winds. By June 30th, the blaze had spread rapidly, threatening the small community of Yarnell and putting firefighters on high alert. Among those battling the fire was the Granite Mountain Hotshots, an elite 20-man crew renowned for their bravery and skill. Based out of Prescott, Arizona, they specialized in creating fire breaks, cleared areas designed to halt advancing flames. On that fateful day, the Hotshots were positioned on a ridge, seemingly safe from the fire below. However, shifting winds created a deadly scenario, trapping the crew as the fire exploded toward them. Despite their training and experience, they found themselves overwhelmed by the blaze's speed and intensity. This is the last picture taken of the Granite Mountain Hotshots. In a desperate bid for survival, the crew deployed their emergency fire shelters, lightweight aluminum tents designed as last-ditch protection against flames and heat. Tragically, these shelters proved ineffective against the Inferno's 2,000-degree temperatures. 19 members of the Granite Mountain Hotshots perished, marking the deadliest wildfire incident for firefighters since 9/11. Only one crew member, Brendan McDonough, survived. Assigned as a lookout that day, McDonough escaped after warning his team of the fire's rapid advance. In the aftermath, investigations into the tragedy revealed several contributing factors. Miscommunication between firefighting teams and unpredictable weather played a significant role. The crew's decision to move from their safety zone remains a subject of debate, with some speculating they were trying to save the nearby town of Yarnell or reposition themselves for better fire suppression efforts. However, the exact reasons may never be known, as the team's radios went silent during their final moments. The Yarnell Hill Fire burned over 8,000 acres and destroyed nearly 130 homes. In honor of the fallen, memorials were erected, and their story inspired the 2017 film Only the Brave. The tragedy also brought renewed attention to wildfire safety, leading to discussions about better equipment, training, and communication systems for firefighters. So this story is from Reddit, and I'll read it as it was written by the person who posted it. This is the last image of a woman called Corrie Van Veggel, who went missing on her descent of the Mardi Himal trek in Nepal in 2018. I was lucky enough to meet her in a hot spring a couple days before. She'd come to Nepal on her own to do some trekking and a yoga retreat. She only had 4 days of trekking left, which included a hike up from the hot springs to Mardi Himal base camp, and then back down to the city Pokhara. I only knew she'd gone missing because I saw her missing person poster in the mountain village I was staying in a few weeks later. She was a lovely person, full of life and adventure, sociable and kind, and it's weird to think I was one of the last people she'd ever met. One of the last photos taken of Marilyn Monroe on her last photo shoot before she died of her suicide or murder. Some people have different opinions on what actually happened. All I see is the pain in her face in this photo shoot, even though there were other photos taken of her on the same day where she was smiling. Payne Stewart's Learjet before its final flight. In 1999, professional golfer Payne Stewart, 3 other passengers, and 2 crew members took off from Orlando, Florida to Dallas, Texas, en route to the PGA Tour Championship practice rounds. Shortly after the start of the flight, rapidly lost cabin pressure, causing everyone aboard to succumb to hypoxia, lack of oxygen. After climbing well past its assigned altitude, all the way to 50,000 feet, and straying from its flight path, the plane was intercepted by fighter jets from the United States Air Force. The pilots monitored the situation, noting the iced, fogged-up windows and the unresponsiveness of the plane's pilots. After several hours, with the plane nearing the Canadian border and on course to Winnipeg, the Canadian Air Force was given orders to shoot the plane down. In the end, the plane came down after running out of fuel in South Dakota. Numerous tributes were held of Payne Stewart, as well as his fellow passengers and the plane's crew. An in-depth investigation found that Learjet was not responsible for the deaths. Gilles Leclerc shared this selfie at the Eagles of Death Metal concert while enjoying a beer with his wife, Marianne Labanane, moments before 4 terrorists stormed the venue and killed everyone in sight. Gilles was killed in the attack, but Marianne survived. Newsreader Christine Chubbuck's on-air suicide in 1974 has long been a source of morbid internet fascination. Despite being broadcast live to thousands, the recording of the newscast was thought to have been lost, with her brother Greg previously telling people, "I don't know to this day where it is, but I know no one knows where it is." It was probably for the best that the tape was lost, but it seems this is no longer the case. Molly Nelson, the widow of Chubbuck's news station, confirmed to Vulture this week that she has the video, it having been passed on to her by her late husband Robert Nelson, who apparently had kept it all these years, though did not say why. In one of the Chubbuck films, Kate plays Christine, a former employee of the WXLT news station, suggests that Molly Nelson might have the tape, which led to her receiving an influx of calls about it. This made her uncomfortable, so she reportedly has passed it on to a very large law firm for safekeeping. On the morning of 15th of July, 1974, WXLT host Chubbuck looked into the camera following a news report and said, "In keeping with Channel 40's policy of bringing you the latest in blood and guts and in living color, you are going to see another first, an attempted suicide." She then drew a .38 caliber revolver from behind her desk and shot herself behind her right ear, falling forward and striking her head on the desk before falling to the floor. The New York Post's controversial photo taken of 58-year-old Queens resident Suk Han, seconds before being fatally struck by a train. He was reportedly pushed onto the tracks at 12:30 p.m. by a panhandler. This image was taken on board Air New Zealand Flight 901, which crashed into Mount Erebus in Antarctica while being operated as a sightseeing flight. The Douglas DC-10 would depart from Auckland to Antarctica and return later that day. On board, The happy passengers could enjoy a spread of food and cocktails while happily snapping pictures and taking films of the view outside. This is a still from an 8mm home movie shot moments before the fatal impact. It was recovered from the wreckage. The last known picture of Christopher McCandless, whilst traveling around America, he traveled into the wilds of Alaska and was later found dead in an abandoned bus he had made into a home. The Station Nightclub Fire. On February 20th, 2003, a night of music and celebration turned into one of the deadliest nightclub disasters in American history. At the Station nightclub in West Warwick, Rhode Island, the rock band Great White was performing in front of a packed crowd of nearly 460 people. Fans filled the small venue, excited to see the band known for their 1980s hits. Tragically, an ill-fated pyrotechnic display during the show would lead to a catastrophic chain of events. As the band launched into their opening song, their tour manager set off a series of fireworks behind the stage. The pyrotechnics were meant to add a dramatic flair to the performance, but they quickly ignited the highly flammable polyurethane foam used as soundproofing on the club's walls and ceiling. Within seconds, flames raced up the walls and thick black smoke began to fill the room. The photo, taken moments before disaster struck, captures the band performing, unaware that the foam behind them was about to catch fire. At first, some in the crowd thought the flames were part of the show, but panic soon spread as the fire intensified. The venue's low ceiling and lack of proper ventilation allowed the fire and toxic smoke to spread rapidly. Patrons scrambled toward the exits, but chaos and poor design exacerbated the tragedy. The building had only 4 exits, and most people rushed toward the main entrance, creating a bottleneck that became a death trap. In the end, 100 people lost their lives, including band member Ty Longley, and more than 200 others were injured. Many victims succumbed to smoke inhalation, burns, or were trampled in the desperate attempt to escape. Survivors later described the horror of being trapped in a crush of bodies as the flames consumed the building. The aftermath of the fire revealed a horrifying series of failures. The club was not equipped with sprinklers, which were not legally required at the time due to the building's age. The polyurethane foam, chosen for cost savings, was highly flammable and released toxic gases when burned. Additionally, the club owners had allowed the pyrotechnics display without proper permits or safety precautions. The disaster led to widespread outrage and legal action. The club's owners, Michael and Jeffrey Derderian, and the band's tour manager, Daniel Beasley, were held accountable for their roles in the tragedy. Beasley served prison time after pleading guilty to manslaughter charges, while the Derderians faced civil lawsuits and public condemnation. The fire also led to stricter fire safety regulations for nightclubs across the United States, including mandatory sprinklers and limits on occupancy. The diver shown, an instructor named Yuri Lipski, was checking the red filter and lens on his helmet camera in preparation for a dive on the Blue Hole, a site near Dahab, Egypt. However, due to perhaps a malfunction with his buoyancy compensator or overweighting from to the camera and other equipment, he descended over 100 meters below the surface during the dive without a proper gas mix, succumbed to seizures from hyperoxia, and drowned. When Yuri's body was recovered from the bottom a few days later, it was discovered that his video camera had recorded the tragedy from the beginning of the dive, including his passing. This picture is of Paul Walker with a fan, just hours before his death. On January 8, 2020, a devastating tragedy claimed the lives of 176 passengers and crew aboard Ukraine International Airlines Flight PS-752. Among them were Sahar Haghjoo and her 9-year-old daughter, Elsa Jadidi, seen smiling in a poignant photo taken in their seats before takeoff. They were preparing to fly home to Toronto, full of anticipation after visiting family in Iran. Tragically, this image would become one of the last glimpses of their lives before the unthinkable occurred. Shortly after takeoff from Tehran's Imam Khomeini International Airport, the plane was struck by 2 surface-to-air missiles fired by the Iranian military. All passengers and crew aboard were killed, turning what should have been a routine flight into a horrific disaster. Sahar and Elsa, along with 54 other Canadian citizens, were among the victims. The crash left a profound scar, particularly on Canada's Iranian community, as many on board were students, professionals, and families with ties to both nations. The incident occurred amidst escalating tensions between the United States and Iran. Just hours before the tragedy, Iran had launched missile strikes on U.S. bases in Iraq in retaliation for the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani. In this heightened state of alert, Iranian defense systems mistook the passenger jet for a hostile aircraft. The Revolutionary Guard later admitted responsibility, citing human error. However, the admission came only after days of denial, leading to international outrage and demands for accountability. The final moments of those on board were marked by confusion and chaos, as the plane was struck minutes after takeoff, bursting into flames and crashing near the village of Khalaj Abad. My deepest sympathy goes out to the families of Sahar and Elsa, and also the other 174 lives lost that day. Aeromexico Flight 498 after colliding with the Piper PA-28, showing its loss of tail fin. This was taken seconds before it crashed, killing all 64 occupants and 15 on the ground. On August 4, 2002, Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, both 10 years old, attended a family barbecue in their hometown of Soham, England. That evening, they left the gathering to buy sweets from a nearby shop, dressed in matching red Manchester United shirts. A photo taken just hours earlier, showing the two best friends smiling happily, would tragically become their last. Holly and Jessica never returned home. Their disappearance sparked one of the largest manhunts in British history, with thousands of officers and volunteers scouring the countryside. Their parents made tearful public appeals, and the case dominated national headlines. The mystery surrounding their disappearance came to a chilling conclusion 2 weeks later when their bodies were discovered in a ditch near Lakenheath, Suffolk, about 10 miles from Soham. Investigators determined that Ian Huntley, the caretaker at the local secondary school, had lured the girls into his home before murdering them. Huntley's partner, Maxine Carr, who had worked as a teaching assistant in the girls' school, initially provided him with a false alibi, further complicating the investigation. What made the case even more horrifying was Huntley's behavior during the search. He appeared on television, speaking to reporters, and feigning concern for the missing girls, even standing alongside their distraught families during community efforts to find them. His seemingly helpful demeanor masked his heinous crimes, but inconsistencies in his statements and forensic evidence eventually led to his arrest. During the trial, it was revealed that Huntley had a history of troubling behavior and allegations of sexual misconduct that had gone largely unchecked. The murders of Holly and Jessica raised serious questions about the vetting processes for individuals working with children, leading to widespread reforms in the UK. Huntley was convicted of both murders in December 2003 and sentenced to life imprisonment, with the judge recommending that he never be released. Maxine Carr was sentenced to 3.5 years for perverting the course of justice, but was released in 2004 under a new identity, sparking public debate and anger. In the black car is Dale Earnhardt, racing with just 2 laps to go in the 2001 Daytona 500. Unfortunately, this is the last time he was photographed alive, and shortly after, he would be killed on the last lap. Alan Hruby, a former college student from Duncan, Oklahoma, committed a horrific crime on a Friday in October 2014 by murdering his parents, John and Joy Hruby, and his 17-year-old sister, Catherine. The next day, he drove down to Dallas for the OU-Texas football game, where he stayed in a hotel with his friends and posted this candid photo on Instagram in what I assume would be an attempt to build an alibi. Didn't work, as he quickly confessed and received multiple life sentences. Why he did all of this is because Alan was deeply in debt and addicted to a lavish lifestyle far beyond his means. As a student, he was known for flaunting designer clothing, expensive vacations, and a lifestyle fueled by money he did not have. His parents, who owned and operated a local newspaper, had tried to rein in his spending, even cutting him off financially at times. He had previously stolen his grandmother's credit card to fund a trip to Europe, which led to a criminal conviction. When his parents discovered this, they expressed frustration and concern over his behavior. However, this wasn't enough to stop Alan's obsession with maintaining his extravagant image. In the weeks leading up to the murders, Allen had racked up significant debt and was desperate for money. Believing he was the sole heir to his family's estate, Allen hatched a plan to kill his family, assuming he would inherit their money and property. Mike Hawthorne and Ivor Bueb celebrating with champagne after winning the 24H Le Mans. Specifically the 1955 Le Mans, during which 84 people, mostly spectators, were killed in a crash. A crash which was at least partially caused by Hawthorne. This is Katie Pladl and her biological father, Stephen Pladl, and it does seem like an innocent or normal photo, but it's not. Katie was born in 1998 to Alyssa and Stephen Pladl, a young couple who had met online as teenagers. Due to difficult circumstances and a desire to give their baby a better life, Alyssa and Stephen decided to place Katie for adoption shortly after her birth. Although this isn't as simple as it seems, according to Alyssa, Stephen had temperament issues, and when Katie was just a little baby, Stephen was aggressive towards her and even hit and drowned her to the point where she was on the brink of losing consciousness. Anyway, so for whatever reason, after they put Katie up for adoption, she was quickly adopted and was welcomed into a loving home by her adoptive parents, Anthony and Kelly Fusco, in New York, where she grew up surrounded by care and opportunities. Katie's life as an adoptee was happy and stable. By the time she graduated from high school in 2016, she was a talented and ambitious young woman with dreams of studying digital advertising at college. However, like many adoptees, Katie felt a natural curiosity about her biological family. At 18, she decided to reach out to her birth parents, Alyssa and Stephen, reconnecting with them through social media. After reconnecting, Katie expressed a desire to meet her birth family in person and learn more about her roots. She moved to Virginia to live with her biological parents and her two younger half-sisters. Initially, this seemed like a positive step, a chance for Katie to bridge the gap between her past and present. However, tensions within the family soon surfaced. Alyssa, Katie's biological mother, decided to leave the household, citing difficulties in her marriage with Stephen. While Katie remained in the home, what began as a reunion meant to reconnect a family took an unfortunate turn. Over time, Katie and Stephen developed an unhealthy and inappropriate romantic relationship, which escalated to the point where they considered themselves a couple. This relationship caused immense strain on everyone involved, especially Alyssa, who became deeply concerned. In July 2017, Stephen and Katie married in Maryland despite their biological connection, which they kept hidden from public. They even welcomed a child together, a son named Bennett, shortly after. When Alyssa learned of the relationship, she contacted authorities, reporting their situation. Following an investigation, both Stephen and Katie were charged and ordered to avoid contact with each other. Their marriage was annulled, and Katie moved back to New York to live with her adoptive parents, who supported her as she tried to rebuild her life. Stephen remained in North Carolina, and their son Bennett was placed in the care of Stephen's mother. Sadly, this story took a devastating turn. On April 11, 2018, Stephen fatally shot 7-month-old Bennett at his home in Knightdale, North Carolina, before driving to New York to track down Katie and her adoptive father, Anthony Fusco. As Katie and Anthony were driving together in New Milford, Connecticut, Stephen ambushed them at an intersection, shooting them both to death. He then fled the scene, driving to Dover, New York, where he took his own life with a self-inflicted gunshot. This tragic sequence of events ended in the loss of 4 innocent lives, and what began as a hopeful family reunion turned into one of the most disturbing family tragedies. The man dressed as Santa Claus in the picture is Bruce MacArthur. He was a landscaper for most of the year and worked as the Agincourt Mall Santa during the holiday season. Between 2010 to 2017, he would lure men to meet up via a dating app, murder them, and spread their remains among planters' boxes at properties he managed. He was found guilty of 8 counts of first-degree murder and is serving life in prison. The suitcase in Cypress Red Lake. In June 2017, Sarah Funk, a New York-based travel vlogger, visited the hauntingly beautiful Mitsero Red Lake in Cyprus. The lake, its waters tinted a toxic blood red from years of mining operations, exuded an eerie, unsettling atmosphere. Sarah, accompanied by her partner Luis Jans, filmed her exploration of the area. At one point, Luis joked, "This is what murder episodes are made of," to which Sarah replied, "This feels like death. I just feel death in the air. It's so nice." While filming, Sarah's camera briefly captured a peculiar object floating in the lake. She dismissed it as a log, snapping a few photos before moving on. In retrospect, the object's boxy shape was unmistakable, something she wouldn't realize until years later. Nearly 2 years after that trip, in April 2019, the Red Lake became the center of a horrific discovery. Cypriot military officer Nikos Metaxas confessed to a series of brutal murders spanning from 2016 to 2018. Metaxas had targeted vulnerable women and children, primarily foreign domestic workers from countries such as the Philippines, India, Nepal, and Romania. His 7 victims, including 2 girls, had all been reported missing, though local authorities had failed to investigate their cases thoroughly. Critics claimed their immigrant status contributed to law enforcement's apparent indifference. As part of his confession, Metaxas revealed that he had disposed of 3 of his victims by sealing their bodies in suitcases and dumping them into Mitsero Red Lake. This shocking revelation prompted an extensive search of the lake, leading to the recovery of 1 suitcase containing human remains. A second suitcase was located but remained unretrieved, while a third has yet to be found. It was during this investigation that Sarah's footage resurfaced, drawing attention to the chilling possibility that the object she filmed in 2017 was one of the suitcases. Although authorities have not officially confirmed using her video in their case, the resemblance between her footage and the recovered suitcases was undeniable. In the aftermath of the revelations, Sarah addressed the situation on her blog. She expressed profound sorrow for the victims' families and clarified that she had no knowledge of the object's significance at the time. "It felt eerie there," she wrote, "but I did not see anything completely out of the norm. I genuinely thought it was a log." She also urged people to stop contacting her about the case as she grappled with the unsettling connection. The case ignited outrage in Cyprus, with widespread criticism directed at the police for their failure to act on the victims' initial disappearances. This photo is Tragedy by the Sea, taken in 1954 in Hermosa Beach, California, after a couple's 19-month-old son was dragged out by the sea right in front of them as they stood there, helpless and shattered. This is a photo of John List and his family. In 1971, this man shot and killed his mother, wife, and children in their New Jersey home. Earlier in the year, he lost his job and was unable to provide the abundant lifestyle he and his family were accustomed to. This was an abject failure in his eyes. He hid the loss of his job from his family. He attempted to secure employment, but nothing measured up to his previous salary. So, he remained unemployed and continued leaving his home as if he were going to work while skimming his mother's account to cover the finances. Once that started to run dry, his only logical next step was to kill them. In his mind, going on welfare would have been too humiliating, so he instead opted to send their souls to heaven. He methodically murdered each family member one by one, moved their bodies to the same room, then cleaned each scene. He canceled deliveries, notified the children's teachers they were going on vacation, and cleared out what little was left in the bank. He even went so far as to cut himself out of family photos so as not to leave any account of himself behind. He spent one last night in the home and left the next morning, lights on and organ music blaring through the house's intercom system. Due to List's multiple ruses, as well as the family's reclusive nature, the bodies of the List family weren't discovered for a month. By then, List was long gone. He managed to evade authorities for 18 years. It wasn't until prosecutors commissioned an excellent forensic artist to produce a physical bust of List with age progression that he was caught. A neighbor of List recognized him and contacted authorities. He was living under an assumed identity in Colorado. He had gained employment as an accountant and was remarried. List was sentenced to 5 terms of life imprisonment. When asked why he didn't kill himself as well, he replied, suicide was a sin, and he wanted to be reunited with his family in heaven. He died in custody due to complications of pneumonia in 2008. The weird thing is, List's home was a mansion, The room the bodies were placed in was a ballroom. Directly above the bodies of his family in the ballroom was a Tiffany skylight worth $100,000 at the time of the killings, more than enough money to have recovered List and his family from financial ruin. Mark Jackson's basketball card. In the background are the Menendez brothers sitting courtside after they killed their parents. This is the photo of the young black boy hugging a police officer and crying that went viral during the BLM movements. That boy was Devonte Hart. He was killed alongside his 2 biological sisters and 3 adopted siblings because their abusive adoptive mother drove their minivan off a cliff. The photo is tragic when you realize that Devonte isn't crying in the photo out of some kind of respect for the police officer. He is crying because he was terrified of police. Devonte's birth mother was a drug addict, and before he and his sisters were put into foster care, he had watched police break into his home and violently drag his mother away. His adoptive mothers didn't care about his trauma around police officers and took him to a BLM protest and forced him to hug the policeman so they could get a cute "look at this black boy hugging an officer" photo for internet points. So the photo that looks like it's about the races getting along is actually about a boy who was being used and who would later be murdered by his abusers. This photo of Christopher Wilder. He was an Australian serial killer who abducted and raped more than 12 women. He was called the Beauty Queen Killer because he often abducted women from malls who were models or involved in pageants, etc. He wasn't believed to kill the woman in this photo, but still very unsettling to see that he's right there, just behind her. In March 2010, 4-year-old Paulette Jabara Farah disappeared under baffling circumstances in Huixquilucan, Mexico. Paulette, a young girl with physical and speech disabilities, was last seen alive on the night of March 21st. Her father and sister had just returned from a family trip, while her mother, Lizette Farah, had come back from a separate vacation. Lizette claimed to have kissed Paulette goodnight before leaving her to sleep. The following morning, the family's nanny discovered Paulette was missing, setting off a frantic search of their home, building, and nearby areas. Despite the involvement of police, media attention, and emotional public appeals from her parents, Paulette remained missing. Then, 9 days later, her body was discovered in a shocking location, her own bedroom. She was found wedged between the mattress and bed frame, still in her pajamas, and partially covered by blankets. Authorities ruled her death an accidental asphyxiation, suggesting she had rolled into the gap while sleeping. This photo was taken on March 22, 2010, the day after Paulette was reported missing. The explanation sparked widespread disbelief and outrage. How could police, family members, and search teams repeatedly miss a body in the very room they had scoured? Why hadn't anyone noticed the smell of decomposition? These questions led to rampant speculation and accusations of a cover-up. As the investigation progressed, troubling details surfaced. The crime scene had been contaminated by hundreds of visitors, including media crews. Lizette's cold demeanor and bizarre comments during interviews fueled suspicions. She made inappropriate jokes about aliens or Harry Potter abducting Paulette, behavior that struck many as unnervingly detached for a grieving mother. Family dysfunction also came to light. Lizette and her husband, Mauricio Guevara, were reportedly facing financial difficulties, and their marriage was strained. Mauricio, who had connections to lead prosecutor Alberto Bazbaz, became a focus of suspicion. Lizette accused him of orchestrating Paulette's death, while Mauricio suggested Lizette or the nannies, Erica and Martha Casimiro, were involved. Both nannies were questioned, but offered no definitive answers. Multiple theories emerged surrounding Paulette's death. Some believe Lizette, overwhelmed by the challenges of raising a child with disabilities, may have killed Paulette and later staged the body's discovery. Others suspect the parents plotted a fake kidnapping to secure financial aid, but that Paulette suffocated accidentally before they could retrieve her. And another theory is sibling involvement. Speculation exists that Paulette's older sister, jealous of the attention Paulette received, might have unintentionally caused her death during a moment of anger. Institutional cover-up. Another theory points to powerful connections shielding the guilty party, with Baz shifting suspicion toward Lizette to protect others. This image of Ian Watkins, lead singer of former rock band Lost Prophets. He would later be sentenced to 35 years in prison for the attempt rape of a 1-year boy, among other horrific charges. If you read the transcript of his sentencing, it's probably going to be one of the most disturbing things you'll ever read. Stalin and the erased faces of history. Joseph Stalin's reign over the Soviet Union was infamous not only for its brutal repression, but for its calculated effort to rewrite history, both figuratively and literally. Stalin wielded terror as a weapon to consolidate his power, eliminating not only political rivals, but also their very presence from the collective memory. Few examples illustrate this more vividly than the infamous photos from the 15th Leningrad Regional Party Conference, taken in 1924 or 1925. The original photograph captures 4 prominent Soviet leaders: Nikolai Antipov, Joseph Stalin, Sergei Kirov, and Nikolai Shvernik. However, over time, as Stalin's paranoia grew and his purges intensified, the image would be systematically altered to erase those who fell out of favor, leaving Stalin as the sole surviving figure in both the photograph and history. Nikolai Antipov, who had risen to the position of deputy chairman of the Council of People's Commissars, was the first to be erased. His political career came to an abrupt end as he became one of the countless victims of Stalin's Great Purge. Nikolai Shvernik, unlike the others, managed to avoid execution and outlived Stalin, but his presence in the photograph was still removed. The most significant figure in the photo, besides Stalin, was Sergei Kirov, a prominent Bolshevik leader and the first secretary of the Communist Party's Central Committee. Kirov was charismatic, popular, and seen as a potential threat to Stalin's authority. In 1934, Kirov was assassinated in his office at the Smolny Institute, shot in the neck under circumstances that remain murky. While Stalin publicly used Kirov's murder as a pretext to launch a massive crackdown on dissidents, many historians believe the assassination was orchestrated on Stalin's orders to eliminate a rival. The progressive removal of figures from the photograph illustrates not only Stalin's deadly purges, but also his obsession with controlling the narrative. Airbrushing former allies and enemies out of official records was more than an act of paranoia. It was a calculated effort to shape history, ensuring that only Stalin and his version of events would remain. This practice of photographic revision became emblematic of Stalin's regime, reflecting its casual disregard for truth and its commitment to propaganda. In Stalin's Soviet Union, to fall out of favor wasn't just a death sentence for the individual. It was a death sentence for their memory, as if they had never existed at all. This picture from a hiking trip has an injured woman in the background. She and a friend had gone hiking and slipped off of a waterfall. Too injured to move, they were there for a day before being found. The woman in the photograph survived, but by the time they were rescued, her friend was already dead. This is the AUF summer camp at Utoya, Norway in July 2011. In a few days, these kids are going to be running for their lives from a terrorist who will come to the island to kill them all. Not everyone in this photo will survive. Everyone in this photo has no idea that their lives are about to be shattered. The terrorist, Anders Behring Breivik, began by detonating a car bomb in Oslo, targeting government buildings, which killed 8 people and injured many more. He then traveled to Utoya Island disguised as a police officer with the intention of killing everyone. He didn't succeed. Some swam away and were rescued by people staying at a campground across the water, who brought out all the boats they could to pull kids out of the water. Others hid in various places around the island. Still, his rampage on the island lasted over an hour, during which he murdered 69 people, most of them teenagers, and injured dozens more. Following his arrest, Breivik showed no remorse and used his trial as a platform to promote his beliefs. He was convicted and sentenced to 21 years in prison, the maximum sentence under Norwegian law, with the possibility of indefinite extensions. So this looks like a couple comrades sitting before the next battle. But guess who's the mustache man sitting in the chair is? Yup, that's him. Woman yelling at a cat meme. Not necessarily a normal image, but the famous woman screaming at a cat meme has a pretty disturbing backstory, at least from the woman's side. Basically, it was taken from a scene from The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, where the woman pointing her finger in the meme, Taylor, is confronting another housewife for essentially outing her, Taylor's abusive ex-husband, on national TV earlier in the season. Her tears and outburst are a reflection of genuine pain, taken from a life-threatening chapter in her past. The cat, named Smudge, started as an innocent Tumblr post showing his dislike for vegetables, but its pairing with Armstrong's image gave the meme an entirely new life. This is the man who killed 22 people while in a fake police cruiser and uniform, pulled off the road in this image, casually changing his vest. James Bulger. James was a happy and lively 2-year-old from Kirkby, Merseyside, whose life was cruelly taken on February 12, 1993, in an unimaginable crime committed by two 10-year-old boys, Robert Thompson and John Venables. That day, James had accompanied his mother, Denise, to a shopping center in Bootle. While Denise briefly turned away to pay at a butcher's shop, James wandered off. CCTV footage captured his abduction by Thompson and Venables, who had been loitering around the center, looking for trouble. The boys led James away by the hand, a haunting image that would later become infamous. The one with James in this photo is Robert Thompson. Over the next several hours, Thompson and Venables walked James over 2 miles to a railway embankment, during which they inflicted appalling abuse on her. They subjected him to physical and psychological torment, including throwing paint in his eyes, beating him with bricks, and striking him with an iron bar. Finally, they left him on the railway tracks, where a passing train would later mutilate his body, concealing some of their actions. The discovery of James's body 2 days later shocked the nation. An intense investigation followed, during which police reviewed hours of CCTV footage and tracked down Thompson and Venables. Despite their young age, the boys were arrested and charged with James's murder. The trial that followed was unprecedented, as it was rare for children so young to face such severe charges. In November 1993, Thompson and Venables were convicted of James's murder, making them the youngest people in modern British history to be found guilty of such a crime. They were sentenced to detention at Her Majesty's pleasure, a form of indefinite imprisonment, with a minimum term of 8 years. After serving their sentences, both were released in 2001 under new identities, sparking controversy and outrage. Venables has since been re-imprisoned multiple times for offenses, including possession of weird videos, further fueling public anger, and calls for stricter monitoring. Looks like just some weirdos at a house party in Salt Lake City. Except the woman with the veil in the middle of the 3 weird fundamentalist robe wearers is 14-year-old Elizabeth Smart. Mitchell and Barzee, the other two, had kidnapped her out of her bedroom a few months earlier. She was serially abused. I covered her entire story in my previous Iceberg video. In fact, it's the very first entry if you want to check it out. But basically, she was eventually freed when the police caught this guy with the beard who kidnapped her. Chris Benoit was a professional wrestler, celebrated for his technical prowess and dedication to the sport. For years, he dazzled fans in the ring, earning accolades and championships across major wrestling organizations like WWE. His intense training and signature moves, including the high-risk diving headbutt, showcased his passion, but also exacted a tremendous physical toll. Behind the spotlight, Benoit struggled with a growing storm of personal and health issues, culminating in a tragedy that shocked the world. On June 25, 2007, police entered Benoit's home in Fayetteville, Georgia, to conduct a welfare check after he failed to appear at scheduled wrestling events. Inside, they discovered a horrific scene. Over the course of a weekend, Benoit had murdered his wife, Nancy, and their 7-year-old son, Daniel, before taking his life. The revelation stunned his fans, peers, and the wrestling community at large. In the investigation that followed, attention turned to Benoit's health and its potential role in his actions. For years, he had endured numerous concussions and head trauma, exacerbated by his relentless wrestling style. The diving headbutt, a move he performed regularly, subjected him to repeated impacts to the skull. Coupled with years of unrelenting matches and training, his brain was under constant assault. Dr. Julian Bales, a neurosurgeon and specialist in brain trauma, examined Benoit's brain post-mortem. The findings were harrowing. His brain showed extensive damage, with patterns consistent with chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a degenerative condition linked to repetitive head injuries. Bales noted that Benoit's brain resembled that of an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient. The damage likely contributed to impaired judgment, emotional instability, and severe mental health issues, all of which may have played a role in the events leading to the tragedy. Adding to the complexity of Benoit's story were personal struggles within his family. Reports suggested that his marriage was under strain, and both he and Nancy had documented tensions leading up to the incident. Daniel, their son, reportedly had health concerns, though accounts about his condition vary. These factors, combined with Benoit's deteriorating mental state, created a perfect storm that erupted in violence. The last known photo of Benoit, taken just days before the tragedy, shows a man who appears calm and composed. Yet, beneath the surface, he was battling a torrent of physical and psychological issues. This physicist, Harold Agnew, is holding the nuclear core of the Fat Man atomic bomb which was dropped on Nagasaki. In the remote Swedish village of Stjärnsund, nestled in Dalarna, a quiet community of just 160 people became the center of one of the country's most haunting murder cases. On April 5, 2008, 10-year-old Engla Höglund had just finished football practice in a nearby field and decided to bike the short 3-mile journey home. After calling her mother, Karina, to ask permission, Engla set off on her journey, agreeing to check in by phone every 10 minutes. But after an initial call to confirm she was on her way, Engla didn't call again. When she failed to arrive home, Karina's worry grew into panic. She searched the village, visited the community center, and checked with friends, but Engla was nowhere to be found. Eventually, Karina spotted Engla's bicycle abandoned in the woods, just 200 yards from their home. The sight of tire tracks leading away suggested foul play. Police were immediately involved, and an exhaustive search began. Despite the efforts of officers, volunteers, and search dogs, there was no sign of Engla. Hope began to fade as days passed. As the case gained national attention, a local man named Thomas Langton came forward with a remarkable piece of evidence. Just hours before Engla's disappearance, Thomas had been testing a new digital camera. At 2:16 p.m., he captured a clear image of Engla biking along the road. Less than a minute later, he photographed a red Saab 900 driving down the same stretch. The photo revealed the car's license plate and its driver. Realizing the potential importance of these images, Thomas handed them over to the police. This break led investigators to Anders Eklund, a 42-year-old truck driver with a violent criminal history. Eklund initially denied involvement, but mounting evidence, including bloodstains in his car and matching tire tracks, cornered him. DNA analysis confirmed his connection to an earlier unsolved murder from 2000, that of 31-year-old Pernilla Hellgren. Confronted with the evidence, Eklund confessed to both crimes. Eklund led police to Engla's remains in a secluded wooded area. The details of her death were harrowing. She had been sexually assaulted, beaten, strangled, and burned. Eklund admitted that he had impulsively abducted Engla after encountering her on the road. On October 6, 2008, Anders Eklund was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murders of Engla and Pernilla. Public outrage erupted as it became clear that previous tips about Eklund had been ignored, possibly allowing him to continue his crimes unchecked.